centres like London, Bristol and Newcastle, all drawing significant crowds that vastly outnumbered the far-right rioters last night.
But will we see a return of widespread violence from these extremists, and have the root causes truly been dealt with? Well, we're joined by former senior member of the National Front, current ambassador for Hope Not Hate advocacy group, that's Matthew Collins, and former Met police officer Gamal Turawa, who likes to be known as G. Good to see you both of you this morning. Crikey, what a week, what a frightening week. To turn on your TV and think that's the country where you live. What a horrific week if you're hiding, too scared to go out of your home. Let's start, shall we, with you, Matthew, because I think for many people, your journey from being with the National Front to spreading peace is a big one. And it's kind of, I guess, what many people would like to see happen with those that feel anger and hate also do. So could you shed some light from your time when you were at the National, why people are rioting, why people are so angry, why they feel so motivated, and what that's about?
Well, I was in a tiny political party. The National Front was obviously feared and very well known, but feared. And I joined it in the 1980s.
Right.
We didn't have Twitter, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have the amplification of our views. And in fact, as G was saying, in the 1980s, the National Front and the things it said and believed had almost gone away, or certainly weren't so above board and and being so amplified. I think a lot of the reason people are rioting, particularly the younger people, is there is a recreational element to it. There's nothing else to do, we'll go out and rally. But I think also there's a long-term thing since Brexit. There's been this idea somehow that we've lost our country. We have to take our country back and we need it and all this kind of language. It doesn't particularly make sense. And then there is this thing, I think, over 14 years, a lot of people in this country didn't get the sort of love, care and attention you should get from a government. And particularly in the last 2 years of the Conservative government, and then in the last week of the Tory government, everything was about immigration. This is what Labour's going to do. They're going to let more immigrants in. They're going to do this. And the former Home Secretary, a person of colour, talking about this country being invaded. So this sort of plays into this narrative, And I think we've scapegoated immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees. And I think the last government did it, and a lot of people on social media are doing it. Instead of talking about 14 years where our NHS was decimated, 14 years where our police force was decimated, 14 years where crime went up, people couldn't see a doctor. And that's why there was this explosion of anger, particularly under the Labour government, because the Tories said this is what's going to happen.
And for that, so what is your, right, you mean that because the Labour government come in?
They tried to scare people that Labour were the party of immigrants.
A party of immigrants. What was your turning point?
Well, mine was one day in a library. Now, we've seen it already that fascists don't like libraries. No. Mine was a violent incident in a library where my colleagues and I, from the National Front and the British National Party, the BNP, we went to a meeting to exercise our right to free speech. And we got into this meeting and we saw we outnumbered and we outpowered the people in there, who were mainly women, mainly Asian women. And they attacked us, or we attacked them, with hammers, with chairs, with tables. It hospitalised 17 people. When it was halfway through this assault, this attack, I looked around the room and I thought all the reasons I joined the National Front, about looking after me and my welfare and my future in society. I looked at the people I was with who were stamping on the heads of these people, and I realised these people on the floor are the ones who care about me. These are the ones who have these petitions to keep libraries open, to keep hospitals open, and these would be the same women who would now be, food banks, another new Tory invention. And these were the good people, and I actually thought we were the good guys standing up for race and nation. And I stood there and thought, you know what, I'm absolute scum. That's what I am for doing this. How does beating people up help me, help my people, help my race? And I just think I'm on the wrong side. I got it totally wrong. And there will be some people who've taken part in these riots or taken part in online hatred, who will have this light bulb moment and go, do you know what, maybe I was wrong. I saw it. talk about some good people, that, you know, those guys who came out in Southport to rebuild the wall at the mosque, or those Muslim guys who came out in Middlesbrough with tea and coffee for the police. And it's like, we could also amplify the good people in our community,
And
give them a bit of a push.
We've seen thousands of I can see your emotion about it even now.
I'm tired.
But, you know, people, we've
yeah.
seen thousands of
Yes.
people take to the streets,
Yeah.
you know, and say, not in our name,
Yeah.
you know, anti-racist protesters. And that is, I suppose, gives hope to some of those that have felt terrified.
Isn't that the question, G? I mean, if you take the lack of riots last night, do you think this is because people like Matthew are suddenly having a change of mind in 10 days, as he had, and not going out? Are they seeing the counter-protests, the anti-racist demonstrators, and thinking, we don't want to go out and be outnumbered? Or are they seeing the pictures of people being charged and sentenced for 1, 2, 3 years for punching a police officer, for throwing a brick, and thinking, I don't want the same thing to happen to me? What's the reason they went out last night?
I mean, there could be a number of reasons. I would like to think personally, I mean, I'm an optimist, right, despite everything, and I would like to think that it just took a while for people to wake up to what was actually happening. And actually sort of like suddenly recognize, actually, no, this is not what we want. And I was waiting for this moment, and I knew it would come at some point. And so I feel kind of emotional about that this morning, that it's actually happened. Because not listening to Matthew here is like going back through my history, but from the opposite side. You know, because I lived through the 80s, I lived through the 60s, I lived through the 70s. I'm the oldest one here, I suppose.
Definitely, yeah.
Thank you.
When you said 60, it's me, yeah.
But you know, so for me, my generation, this is not something new, right? What's new about this is the social media aspect, but it's not a new thing. And I think it just took time for people to catch up with that and to recognize, oh dear.
We don't want to go there.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was it like being a police officer with the colour of your skin in the times when you were potentially one of those that was receiving bricks, abuse, all of the things that we have been appalled by?
I mean, there's the side of it that says, right, this is the job. This is what we joined for. You know, you hear cops saying it all the time when they've done something that people see as heroic. You sort of turn around and say, well, I was just doing my job. And there is that side of it. But I remember when I first joined, one of my earliest experiences, I was at Notting Hill Carnival. And this was back in the days when there was a lot of tension there. And we were sort of standing in a line at the end of the day, all in a line, watching people come out, making sure people came out safely. And as people walked past, I was the only black officer in that line. People would stop and spit at me.
God.
Right? They would stop and spit at me. And I remember the sergeant would be standing behind me saying, hold it together, G. And I think that sums it up, is that you have your emotional stuff going on inside, but you've got to hold it in.
Did you
But
get
if you got
attacked
to
by
20
other communities? By other communities, sorry, Ed,
By-
by other communities for joining the police as well? Because potentially you could be in the middle.
Yeah, and you are in the middle a lot of the time. You are in the middle. You know, I was called coconut, I was called bounty, and those are the polite terms. But you know, you have to go for that thing of, you have to find something within yourself. And I think when I talk to young black officers now, I said, when I joined, if I went to my black friends and said, this is what was happening, they would say, well, you shouldn't have joined. If I went to my white colleagues and said, this is what's happening, they'd look at me like, I don't get it. So a lot of the time you are holding that stuff in by yourself. And one of the things I hope today is the police now more aware that black officers or officers of colour, right, will need some additional support around this.
The thing is, though, back in 2011, the spark for the riots was police killing a black man, Mark Duggan. And so therefore you could see why for you, this is kind of controversial for you, a black police officer. If you come forward to today, I mean, the anger and hate towards the police, I mean, it's not the police who police the borders. It's not the police who make decisions about migration. Doesn't it shock you that for these far-right protesters, they've decided the police are now the enemy?
Yeah, but they see the police as It's the easiest part of the establishment that they can get to. That's a visible part of the establishment. You know, they can't get into Parliament, they can't get in, but the police are, you know, there in front of them. But also, I'll go back and say, you know, when you talked about the 2011, yes, Mark Duggan was a catalyst, but it wasn't the cause.
No.
You know, when you look back, and it's the same thing that Matthew was just talking about, when you look at these things, you can see the build-up.
Yeah.
You know, that year, we had the MPs stuff going on. You had, oh God, I forgot what it was then. But you had a whole load of stuff that was going on in society that young people thought, we're not part of this.
Yeah.
Well, it's wonderful to have you both on this morning, and hopefully, you know, we can have a sense of your optimism that eventually people wake up and take action. Good to speak to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for telling your story, Mark. It's really, really important. Appreciate it.